I never thought one family dinner could change everything. That night, my in-laws looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're nothing without us." The whole table froze. But what they didn't know is that I had been waiting for this moment, and inside my jacket was a letter from the lawyer that would silence them all. Family dinner always carried that invisible weight in the air, an almost palpable density that settled in the lungs and made it difficult to breathe. It wasn't just a meal, it was a complex ritual, a meticulously set stage where every glance, every whispered comment, every seemingly insignificant detail became a matter of judgment. As I maneuvered the car into park in front of my in-laws' imposing home, I felt butterflies in my stomach, that familiar, icy not typical of someone about to knowingly enter hostile territory. This wasn't ordinary anxiety, that nervous flutter before a social event. It was something deeper, more primal, the feeling that somehow I was preparing for a silent battle, a war of attrition waged with fake smiles and razor-sharp words. The house was splendidly lit, a beacon of prosperity in the upscale neighborhood. The large windows in the living room revealed moving silhouettes, shadows of people milling about, laughing with apparent insouciance, serving glasses of wine I knew was expensive. From the outside, the scene projected the perfect image of family harmony, a picture worthy of a margarine commercial. But I, the intruder, the dissonant element, already knew the truth hidden behind that facade of happiness. I knew what awaited me on the other side of the solid oak door. I took a deep breath, the cool night air filling my lungs, and adjusted the collar of my coat, a futile attempt to compose myself. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, seeking a center of calm amidst the inner turmoil. Today will be different, I thought, the phrase sounding more like a prayer than a statement. Today, the script changes. As soon as my finger touched the doorbell, whose sound seemed to resonate with a funereal solemnity, the door opened with almost rehearsed swiftness. It was my sister-in-law, Beatrice. She greeted me with that characteristic smile, perfectly outlined by vibrant red lipstick, but which never reached her eyes. It was a forced smile, too polite to be sincere, a mask of cordiality that barely concealed contempt. Before even inviting me in, she made a point of scanning me up and down, a clinical, appraising look like someone inspecting merchandise to ensure it was up to the task. "You're here," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I thought you'd be late again." The intonation seemed innocent, but the strategic pause and the emphasis on again carried a subtle venom, a reminder of a past failure, a small blow delivered before I could even cross the threshold. I walked in and immediately felt the shift in the atmosphere. Eyes, previously scattered throughout the room, converged on me as if I were an actor entering the stage mid-scene. My in-laws, Osvaldo and Regina, stood near the vast dining table, quietly discussing the order of the dishes, a performance of normalcy that was instantly interrupted by my presence. My father-in-law, a man whose posture exuded unquestionable authority, didn't even bother to hide his discomfort. He simply lifted his chin and gave me a slight nod, a minimal acknowledgement, without deigning to get up. It was a gesture that clearly said, "I see you, but I don't require your presence." My mother-in-law, the true queen of that room, the matriarch who ruled every interaction with an iron fist disguised in velvet, gave me a cold smile, the kind that seemed more like a warning than a greeting. It was a smile that said, "You're on my turf, under my rules. Watch your step." The table was, as always, beautifully set. The perfectly starched white linen tablecloth fell in impeccable folds. The crystal glasses, variously shaped for water, red wine, and white wine, sparkled in the light from the pendant chandelier. The porcelain plates, with their delicate gold threads, were lined with military precision, as if they were part of an exhibition in a home decor magazine. But the contrast between the cool elegance of the setting and the palpable tension in the air was brutal, almost grotesque. I sat in my usual spot, at the end of the table, near the corner, as if that were the geographically designated zone for those who don't really belong, exile within the dining room itself. As the dishes began to be served by a silent and efficient waitress, The conversations around me flowed with rehearsed ease. Laughter punctuated memories of trips to Europe, small gossip about distant cousins, and summer vacation plans. But there was a common thread running through all the conversations, an unspoken rule everyone followed to the letter. I was never included. It was as if I were a displaced piece of another puzzle, someone physically present but spectral, socially invisible. Whenever I tried to participate, risking a comment on a topic I knew well, there would be a quick exchange of glances between them, a microsecond of silent communication, and the subject would be abruptly changed. My words hung in the air, dying without finding an echo. The wine, a full-bodied and expensive red, flowed generously. The silverware clinked gently against the plates, but inside I felt that corrosive mixture of irritation and resignation intensifying. I was accustomed, or rather numb, to being treated as the outsider, their daughter's husband, a separate entity from the family unit. But something about that night, a different electricity in the air, told me the situation was about to surpass any remaining bounds of civility. My wife, Helena, sitting next to me, tried to hide it. She smiled, participating in the conversations, but I, who knew every nuance of her expression, noticed the tension in her eyes, the way her fingers drummed discreetly on her thigh under the table. She knew what I went through at each of those dinners. Her pain was twofold. She saw the man she loved being diminished, and at the same time, she felt helpless, caught between loyalty to the family that raised her and respect for me. This division gnawed at her insides, and it was visible in the way her smile seemed fragile, about to break. What no one knew, absolutely no one at that sumptuous table, was that, this time, I had prepared myself. I hadn't come to this dinner just to endure another round of passive-aggressive humiliation. There was something in my inside jacket pocket, something that would fundamentally shift the power dynamics. A simple sheet of paper, folded in 3 parts, signed and notarized, but charged with seismic power, enough to completely reverse the power struggle they were so intent on maintaining. For now, I remained silent, observing, cataloging each veiled insult. With every subtle comment about certain career choices, every snicker when I mentioned a project of mine, every judgmental look that measured me and deemed me inadequate, I could only think, with an icy calm forming in my core, let them talk. Let them feel superior. Soon, it will be my turn. And it was with that thought, a silent promise to myself, that the first course, a creamy asparagus soup, was served, and dinner truly began. Dinner progressed at a glacial pace as always. The banal conversations, which served to fill the void of genuine affection, mingled with the constant clink of cutlery against the fine china. They talked about the stock market, the club's new renovation, Beatrice's vacation in Bali, and plans for the future of the family business. But there was something different that night, the intensity in my in-laws' eyes. I could feel, almost like a physical pressure in my chest, that they were laying the groundwork for something bigger. It was as if each sentence they uttered was bait, a pawn sacrificed in the chess game of humiliation, as they waited for the right moment to launch the real attack, the checkmate. At first, the subtle hints came, fired like poison darts. My mother-in-law, Regina, with her melodious voice laced with a sickening sweetness, commented, looking at a vague point above my head, "It's a shame how some men simply can't offer the life that a woman from a good family, like our Helena, truly deserves." The table let out a discreet, knowing laugh. Even without mentioning my name, everyone there, including the waitress serving the wine, knew who she was referring to. I simply took a deep breath, concentrating on the texture of the soup in my mouth, trying to maintain the calm I'd promised myself. Soon after, my brother-in-law, Ricardo, Beatrice's husband, joined the conversation, eager to score points with his in-laws. "It's a good thing we have stability, isn't it, father-in-law? You can't build a solid future counting on people who are still trying to find themselves." The word trying, pronounced with a pitying inflection, echoed inside me like a blade. Apparently, in their distorted view, my entire journey, the sleepless nights, the risks I took, the business I was building from scratch, was worthless. It was just an attempt, Helena discreetly squeezed my hand under the table, a touch that was both an apology and a plea. It was her way of asking for silence, of begging me not to react, not to give them the pleasure of open conflict. I knew she was irremediably torn. She loved her family, but she understood perfectly how much those situations hurt me, diminished me, emptied me. Then came the final blow, the calculated move that would change the course of the evening and our lives. My father-in-law, Osvaldo, with his imposing posture and thunderous voice, set his knife and fork aside, crossing them on the plate with a sharp clunk. He wiped his mouth with his linen napkin and looked directly at me. The room, which until then had been filled with side conversations and forced laughter, fell silent in an instant. The silence was so abrupt it felt artificial. He didn't need to raise his voice for everyone in the room, including the Baroque angels painted on the ceiling, to hear. "You know that without our help, you would be nothing, right?" The words fell like stones to the table, shattering the thin veneer of civility. There was no more room for disguise. It wasn't an indirect remark. It was a direct, frontal, calculated attack. The phrase seemed rehearsed, prepared for that specific moment, as if he'd waited all dinner to unleash it in front of the entire family, his captive audience. There were a few seconds of absolute silence. Even the cutlery seemed to have stopped in midair. All eyes, previously wandering, turned to me, waiting for my reaction. I could see the satisfaction in my father-in-law's eyes, the expectation that I would lower my head, as I always had. He wanted me to shrink, to stammer out a weak defense, to assume, in front of everyone, the inferior position he had assigned me since the day Helena introduced me. My mother-in-law, like a perfectly timed supporting actress, completed the attack with a short laugh, a high-pitched, joyless sound, almost a mockery. "It's true. Without us, you wouldn't even have a seat at this table." Those words pierced the room like an icy arrow. It was humiliation in its purest form, unmasked, and worst of all, public, in front of the whole family, transforming my embarrassment into entertainment. The tension was palpable, thick as molasses. I felt my heart race, the blood rushing to my face, boiling. Yet, amidst this physiological storm, there was a strange calm within me, an almost strategic coolness. Because, unlike all the other times, I wasn't empty-handed. I wasn't there to be the evening's emotional punching bag. I wasn't there to swallow in silence. I looked around, slowly scanning the table. Some family members, like a more distant uncle and cousin, avoided the scene, lowering their eyes to their plates, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on the china, pretending nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Others, however, like Beatriz and Ricardo, watched with a barely concealed pleasure tugging at the corners of their lips. It was as if this kind of spectacle were an expected part of the menu, the climax of the family dinner show. Helena seemed to want to melt into the chair, disappear. She lowered her head, biting her lower lip tightly, clearly embarrassed and mortified. She knew that this time, her family had crossed an invisible line. But she also knew me. She knew that this time, I wouldn't let it slide. And it was in that moment, with the room plunged into a heavy, expectant silence, that a small flame of resolve, fueled by years of small and large humiliations, became a bonfire within me. I wouldn't respond with shouts. I wouldn't return the insults in kind. There was no need. The best answer, the definitive answer, was there, hidden within me, waiting only for the right moment to be revealed. My in-laws were still smiling, pleased with the impact of their own words, firmly believing they had won once again, that they had reaffirmed their superiority. But they had no idea that night, the story they were accustomed to writing would have a completely different ending. The moment that followed my father-in-law's words was like a sharp cut in the fabric of reality in that dining room. The air grew heavy, dense, and the sound of voices, laughter, and the clinking of cutlery all vanished, as if someone had flipped an invisible switch. What remained was absolute, uncomfortable silence, which became almost deafening as it dragged on. I could hear my own heart beating faster inside my chest, a dull, rhythmic drum, marking the countdown to something inevitable. It was a mixture of pent-up rage and electrifying anticipation. The people at the table stood like wax statues. Cutlery hovered midway over the plates, wine glasses suspended in hands, but no one moved. It was as if the dinner had been frozen in time, a snapshot of maximum tension. The light from the crystal chandelier fragmented on the red wine, creating motionless reflections, while each person there wondered, not if I would react, but how. My wife was the first to break the spell, but her attempt was hesitant, weak. She whispered, her voice barely audible. "Father, please." Her voice was low, fragile as a silk thread, but the damage was already done. That sentence could not be taken back. Everyone knew that moment could not be erased or ignored. The wound was open. My sister-in-law, Beatrice, coughed lightly, a dry, artificial sound, trying to disguise the embarrassment that was beginning to set in. But her eyes, fixed on me, shone with a malicious curiosity. She was anxious, thirsty for drama. If I kept quiet, she'd have one more reason to laugh at me behind my back, to label me weak. If I exploded, it would confirm that I was the out-of-control, the inadequate one, exactly as they always painted me. For her, it was a win-win situation. My father-in-law, Osvaldo, kept staring at me, his jaw clenched, his eyes steady, unblinking. He knew exactly what he was doing. It was an open challenge, a duel. It was as if he were telling me with his gaze, "Come on, fight back. Show everyone I'm right about you. Show them the animal you are beneath that suit." Meanwhile, my mother-in-law, Regina, crossed her arms and leaned back comfortably in her chair, a victorious and complacent smile on her lips. It was the smile of someone who believed she was in complete control, of someone who could already foresee the end of that scene. Me, once again, humiliated, embarrassed, without a reaction, just swallowing hard as life and dinner moved on, leaving me behind. But the silence began to drag on for too long. And silence, when it lasts, changes form. First, it's uncomfortable for the victim. Then, it begins to bother the instigator. And that's exactly what I noticed. My father-in-law's firm, defiant gaze began to turn to impatience. My mother-in-law's confident, arrogant expression began to waver, giving way to a shadow of uncertainty. They expected a quick, impulsive reaction. They expected me to lose myself in angry, disjointed words. But I didn't give them that pleasure. With every second I remained silent, the tension in the room increased exponentially. I could feel the other family members shifting in their seats, their discomfort becoming apparent. My uncle cleared his throat. Ricardo, my brother-in-law, filled his wine glass to the brim, just to have something to do with his hands. The silence forced everyone to confront the cruelty of what had been said. Inside me, this silence was like fuel. It was a strategic pause. I knew the lawyer's letter was still in my jacket pocket, and that sooner or later, it would surface. But before I played my final card, I wanted them to feel the full weight of what they had just said. I wanted them to suffocate on their own poison, to drown in the vacuum they themselves created. Helena looked up at me with a pained expression, her eyes pleading. She knew my silence well. It was my way of processing, of carrying an answer within me, of preparing a move no one, not even her, expected. She took my hand again, under the table, squeezing it tighter this time, a grip that pleaded, "Please don't do anything now. Don't make things worse." But I already knew there was no going back. The difference was that this time, I wasn't in a rush. I would let every second of the silence stretch, as long as I could bear. Until everyone at that table, one by one, realized that it wasn't me who was naked and embarrassed. It was them. And that's exactly what happened. The silence, which had begun as a gun pointed at me, turned into a shadow that fell over them. My in-laws' momentary, sweet victory was beginning to lose its power, to turn bitter. The confidence in their smiles was fading with each passing moment. They had played the heaviest card in their deck, but they hadn't expected me to simply not react as expected. And in that void of words, in that suffocating, oppressive pause, everyone, without exception, understood that something was irretrievably broken. and that something even more shocking was about to happen. I could, indeed, have remained silent for the rest of that interminable dinner. I could have swallowed the humiliation, once again, pretended I hadn't heard the direct insult, and moved on, as I had done on so many other occasions, to preserve a peace that never truly existed. But that night, something was different. It wasn't just the explicit aggression of the words, it wasn't just the orchestrated public shaming, it was the arrogant certainty in their eyes, the conviction that I would never have the courage or the means to fight back. They didn't see me as a threat. They saw me as an object. And it was exactly this certainty, this absolute underestimation, that made me make the decision. While the oppressive silence still hung in the air, I took a deep breath, not nervously, but with the calm of someone about to execute a long thought-out plan. I leaned back slightly in my chair, adjusting my posture, and gave a small smile. Not a sneer or an angry smile, but a knowing smile of someone who knows something others don't. This detail, so simple and unexpected, was enough to unsettle my in-laws. They expected anger, shouting, perhaps even the tears of a wounded man. But they didn't expect calm. They definitely didn't expect confidence. My mother-in-law arched an eyebrow, her expression changing from triumph to intrigue. My father-in-law pressed his lips together in a thin line, as if preparing to redouble his attack if necessary. I could read his thoughts clearly. He's bluffing. He won't have the courage. It was at that moment that my resolve crystallized into action. I would not respond with empty words, for they would dissipate. I would not return insults, for insults would only lower me to their level. I would respond with something tangible, something that carried more weight than any sentence, the irrefutable truth that lay hidden inside the envelope in my pocket. But before I drew the card, I needed to set the stage. The entire table was attentive, each person on edge, waiting for my next move. It was the perfect moment to reverse the power play, to show that the control of the situation, which they had always so zealously maintained, was no longer in their hands. I uncrossed my arms, a deliberate gesture of openness. I set my cutlery aside, on the untouched plate, and spoke softly, but firmly enough for everyone to hear clearly, forcing them to lean toward me. Interesting, it's always the same story, isn't it? No one answered. Silence was now my ally. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others pretended to take another sip of wine, but I could tell they were all listening. Their bodies were turned toward me. I continued, keeping my tone calm and measured. You love to repeat this narrative, that I would be nothing without you, that I'm only sitting here, breathing this air, because of this family's generosity. And you know what? For a long time, I let it slide. For love of Helena, I ate every word. Helena's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected me to break the silence so articulately. My mother-in-law let out a sarcastic laugh, trying to regain control. And what are you going to do now? Speak louder than us? Are you going to lecture us? I just stared at her without answering, letting the silence after her question wash over the table. It was a different silence than before, not one of awkwardness, but of pure anticipation. Now I had everyone's undivided attention. My father-in-law leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me. Be a man for once. Say what you have to say or forever hold your peace. And it was there, in that provocation at that very moment, that my decision took on its final form. I would not stoop to a game of insults. I would not enter their territory of aggression. I would use logic, facts, the very thing they so prized in the business world, to dismantle every word, every assumption, to turn the tide with something indisputable. I discreetly touched the inside pocket of my coat, just with my fingertips, feeling the folded paper inside. The weight seemed greater than ever, as if the envelope carried not just lines of legal text, but all the dignity, all the respect they had systematically tried to strip from me over the years. And I thought to myself, with piercing clarity, the time has come. I looked up and slowly looked at each person around the table, one by one, until my eyes settled back on my in-laws. Then I said calmly, "You always said I'm nothing without you, that I have nothing. But today, I brought something to prove the exact opposite. The impact was immediate and visible. My brother-in-law, Ricardo, sat up straighter in his chair. My mother-in-law stopped smiling, her face becoming a mask of curiosity and apprehension. And my father-in-law narrowed his eyes, his keen businessman's instincts realizing something was wrong, that an unexpected variable had entered the equation. The entire table hung in suspense, as if everyone had collectively held their breath. I hadn't even taken the letter out of my pocket yet. The mere announcement of its existence was enough. And that decision alone, that newfound confidence alone, had completely changed the mood of that dinner. At that moment, it was no longer they who held the power of speech. It was me. The weight of the letter in my pocket seemed to grow with each passing second, a physical presence that anchored my courage. All eyes were fixed on me, glazed, as if I'd lit a short fuse in the middle of a powder keg. The silence in the room was no longer one of embarrassment, nor of expectation. It was now one of pure, dense suspense. Everyone there, in their own way, tried to guess what was to come. I deliberately let this mood linger, savoring the control I'd never had before. I picked up my wineglass, raised it slightly, and took a slow, lingering sip, maintaining eye contact with my father-in-law over the rim of the crystal. Only then did I place the glass back on the table, with deliberate calm, the soft sound of glass against linen echoing in the absolute silence. It was an act of power, a demonstration that I was in control of time, guiding everyone toward the outcome known only to me. With firm, methodical movements, I reached into my coat pocket. I saw my father-in-law's jaw muscles tighten. Some family members audibly held their breath. Trying to maintain a facade of authority, he said in a disdainful tone that couldn't hide a hint of anxiety, "What is this now? A resignation letter from your little job? Another one of your excuses for your failure?" I didn't respond. The provocation was empty now. I removed the white envelope, slowly, almost theatrically, and placed it on the table, right in the center, equidistant from everyone. The sound of the paper against the starched linen tablecloth sounded like thunder in the stillness of the room. The envelope remained there, a white, innocent object charged with immense destructive potential. My mother-in-law frowned, curiosity overcoming her arrogance. "What is this?" she asked, her voice a little higher than usual. I looked directly at her, and then at my father-in-law. "It's proof. Proof that I never needed you for anything. On the contrary, maybe from now on, you'll be the ones who need me." With my fingertips, I opened the envelope and removed the folded sheet of paper. It was an official document, a contract, with the law firm's letterhead at the top, stamps, signatures, and everything that conveyed unquestionable seriousness. I held it by the edges and slowly unfolded it, letting everyone see the formal heading without yet revealing the content of the text. My brother-in-law, Ricardo, always the most impatient and curious, leaned forward, trying to read. "Is this some kind of threat? Are you threatening us?" I smiled, a genuine smile for the first time that night.
No, Ricardo.
"It's not a threat. It's just the truth, put on paper. And the truth can be uncomfortable sometimes. The truth is, things have changed." With a smooth movement, I placed the document on the table, turning it so it was facing my in-laws. Their expressions changed instantly. Regina's superior smile faded, as if it were made of ash. Osvaldo's air of control and power drained from his lungs, leaving him visibly smaller in his imposing chair. They recognized the seriousness of it immediately. It wasn't a bluff. My mother-in-law tried to regain her composure, clinging to the last shreds of her authority. "You're being ridiculous. You're overreacting. What could possibly be in this paper that would change anything?" It was then that I revealed, my voice firm, clear, and cutting, each word carefully chosen. "This letter is an asset transfer agreement, finalized this afternoon. It states that the mortgage on this property, which you are so proud to call our family home, has been foreclosed on for non-payment. And the new creditor, who purchased the debt and now holds the title, is me. This house no longer belongs to you. It is in my name." The impact was a shockwave that swept through the room. The room erupted in murmurs and gasps of disbelief. My sister-in-law, Beatrice, clapped her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. My father-in-law paled, the color draining from his face, and for the first time in my life, I saw doubt and fear in his eyes. I continued, without giving them time to recover. While you were busy belittling me, calling me a failure, I was taking care of what really matters. I was investing. The company you thought you controlled with an iron fist was drowning in debt that you hid even from yourselves. Debts that I bought one by one through an investment fund. The company, the assets, everything you believed to be the foundation of your power, now has a new owner. And that owner is me. Helena looked at me, her eyes slowly shifting from disbelief to shocking understanding. She didn't know the details. I had kept this a complete secret, not because I distrusted her, but because I knew the revelation needed to happen this way, like a bolt from the blue, in front of everyone, so that the humiliation they had inflicted on me would be returned in the form of an undeniable truth. My father-in-law, in a final spasm of authority, slammed his hand on the table, the sound making the glasses shake. This is ridiculous. It's a lie. You're making it up. This can't be true. I pushed the document closer to him with a calm gesture. Read it. It's all there. Every clause, every signature, every notarization. There's nothing you can dispute. While you humiliated me, your lawyer was finalizing the transfer with me. He took the paper with trembling hands. As his eyes scanned the lines, his face changed color, going from the red of anger to the pale white of defeat. The confidence, the arrogance, all vanished, replaced by a heavy silence, laden with ruin. My mother-in-law, beside him, tried to read over his shoulder, but she was already too pale, her once regal posture now hunched, as if the weight of the world had collapsed upon her. The table, once the scene of my humiliation, was now the stage for the most spectacular turnaround. Everyone looked at me differently. I was no longer the stranger sitting in the corner, the outsider. I had rewritten the narrative, not with words, but with power. I took the document back, calmly folded it, and put it back in the envelope. I looked at each of them in turn, without raising my voice, letting my final words hang in the air like a sentence. You always said that I was nothing without you, that I was a zero. But today, at this table, it's clear that the one who is nothing is you without me. The silence that followed was no longer awkward or expectant. It was the silence of absolute shock. The silence of the end of an era. If this story has kept you hooked so far, just imagine how many more are yet to come. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episodes. Leave your like if this turn of events surprised you. Share with someone who needs to hear that dignity and respect always win in the end.